I arrived at the small convenience store, the only building for miles, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance along the cracked pavement. I was excited yet apprehensive. It was my first day on the job as a cashier in this isolated outpost. The previous employee had left abruptly, leaving behind a thick atmosphere of dread and an unsettling silence that enveloped the aisles. After a brief introduction, my manager handed me a tattered piece of paper that seemed to have been folded and unfolded numerous times, its corners frayed and stained. With a nervous gulp, I read the rules I was required to follow, each one more chilling than the last, the first being, if you see a customer wearing a red coat, do not serve them. The words sent a shiver down my spine, but I dismissed the unease, chalking it up to the stories I'd heard about this place. The next rule stated, if you hear a child laughing, do not investigate. My mind raced with questions, the image of a child playing in this desolate place sending a jolt of fear through me. Another rule read, never count the cash after dark, and my stomach sank. The thought of being in that dimly lit store alone, counting bills, sent chills down my spine. If the lights flicker, do not move until they stabilize, the paper warned, and I felt a strange compulsion to look up at the flickering fluorescent lights above me, wondering what might happen if I didn't obey. There was a rule that struck me as particularly ominous. Do not answer the phone if it rings after midnight. I could feel the weight of the store's isolation pressing down on me. What kind of calls would come at that hour? As I stood behind the counter, I noticed a subtle draft and heard what sounded like whispering coming from the back aisles, compelling me to read the final rule. If the store goes silent, wait for a sound to return. Silence is an omen. I shook off the creeping dread, convincing myself it was just an overactive imagination. But as customers began to trickle in, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The store felt alive in a way I couldn't comprehend, each aisle a darkened corridor leading into the unknown. And as I forced myself to smile at the first customer, a chill ran through me, remembering the rule about the red coat. And when a woman stepped in, clad in a bright crimson coat, my heart raced, every instinct screaming at me to turn her away. The store was strangely empty, the clock ticking louder as I stood frozen in fear, and as the fluorescent lights flickered once again, I felt a presence loom closer, tightening its grip on my sanity, and suddenly, the store felt less like a place of business and more like a trap where the rules dictated not just my job, but my very survival. Each sound seemed amplified. The rustle of bags, the jingle of coins, and the whispering grew louder in my ears, demanding attention. The weight of the rules bearing down on me like a thick fog as I clutched the counter, fighting against the rising panic that clawed at my throat. And in that moment, I knew that the true horror of the store was not just the rules themselves, but what lay beyond them, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment I would inevitably break one and become part of this dark history. As the door swung open again, the bell chiming like a death knell, I braced myself, terrified of what awaited me, feeling the dread coiling tighter around my heart, knowing I had stepped into a nightmare from which there might be no escape, each rule a fragile thread keeping me tethered to reality while the darkness threatened to consume me whole. The oppressive silence of the convenience store deepened, wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud, and I felt the weight of every rule bearing down on my sanity as the shadows stretched ominously across the floor. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like a warning, and I began to feel as if the very walls were leaning in, eager to eavesdrop on my spiraling thoughts. As I watched the woman in the red coat from the corner of my eye, her movements were unnervingly fluid, Her eyes locked on me with an intensity that felt like she was peering into my soul. The flickering lights above cast twisted shapes on her figure, distorting her features and making her look almost otherworldly. And when she turned to face me fully, a chill gripped my heart. Her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile filled with something sinister and unknowable. I recalled the second rule: if you hear a child laughing, do not investigate. And my pulse quickened as the laughter echoed again, a high-pitched giggle that seemed to dance between the aisles, taunting me, daring me to explore its source. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground, compelled to remain behind the counter, as if some unseen force held me captive. The store felt like a living entity, breathing with anticipation, and as the laughter faded into silence, the air thickened and the shadows shifted again, deeper and darker, as if something was writhing just out of sight. I dared to glance at the cash register, my thoughts racing, but the rule against counting cash after dark felt like a cold hand on my shoulder, urging me to look away, and I suppressed the urge to check the time, knowing that every passing minute drew me closer to the witching hour. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered more violently, plunging the store into moments of darkness before revealing fleeting glimpses of twisted figures lurking just beyond the illumination. And I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching me, waiting for me to break the rules, to give in to my terror. A jarring noise erupted from the back, a sound that resembled shuffling footsteps mingled with whispered curses, and I remembered the rule warning me about silence. The store was alive, and I was the prey in this hunt. The door swung open again with a creak that felt like a scream, and the bell rang louder than before, each chime resonating through the store like a death knell, sending waves of dread crashing over me. The woman in the red coat stepped forward, and as she did, the temperature plummeted, frost forming on the edges of the display cases. My breath hitched as I felt a presence at my back, a tangible force that sent shivers coursing through my spine, and I instinctively turned to look, but there was nothing there, just shadows. The whispers grew louder, intertwining with the sound of my racing heart, and I recalled the rule about the phone. Each ring seemed to pull at the edges of my sanity, beckoning me to answer it, but I knew I had to resist. I had to endure, had to remain vigilant as the rules played out before me like an ominous symphony, each note a reminder of the darkness that lay just beyond the fluorescent glow, waiting for me to slip up, to falter in my resolve. And as I gripped the counter, the weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, and I felt the walls pulse with life, a heartbeat echoing in rhythm with my own. And I understood that every second spent here was a gamble, a chance that I might not see the dawn, as the store and its secrets closed in around me like a trap. Every flicker of light a countdown to the moment I would either escape this nightmare or become a part of it forever. I felt the temperature drop further, a chill wrapping around me like a tightening noose, and I knew I had to keep my mind sharp if I wanted to survive the horrors lurking in this isolated convenience store. With trembling hands, I grabbed a flashlight from beneath the counter, its beam piercing through the oppressive darkness that enveloped the aisles, revealing a world warped by shadows. I decided to confront my fear, recalling the laughter that had echoed through the store, so I took a hesitant step towards the source, my heart pounding with each footfall as the rule warning me against investigating whispered in my mind like a sinister chant. As I rounded the corner, I was met with an unsettling sight. A row of toys, their brightly colored packaging contrasting sharply with the dim light. But what caught my attention was a small doll sitting atop the shelf, its glassy eyes staring blankly ahead, and a wave of dread washed over me as I instinctively remembered the rule about silence being an omen. I had to fight the urge to touch it, the unsettling presence it radiated telling me I should turn back, but my curiosity urged me forward, and I lifted the doll to examine it closely. The moment I touched it, the lights flickered violently, plunging the store into darkness for a heartbeat before illuminating the aisles again. And in that fleeting moment, I heard a low, guttural whisper slither through the air. "Don't play with what doesn't belong to you." Panic surged within me, and I dropped the doll, retreating as I hurried back to the counter. The rule about the woman in the red coat flooding my mind once more. I glanced at her, still watching from the snack aisle. Her smile widened grotesquely, revealing teeth that seemed far too sharp for a human. My instincts screamed at me to run, but the oppressive air held me in place, and I felt as if the very walls were closing in, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows that danced mockingly at the edges of my vision. I remembered the rule that warned against counting the cash after dark and forced myself to focus on my tasks. But the cash drawer beckoned me like a siren, and I couldn't help but sneak a glance at the total. The numbers flickered, distorting and rearranging themselves before my eyes until they finally settled on an ominous figure that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Just then, the phone rang, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the silence like a knife, and the rule about answering it echoed in my head like a dire warning. I felt compelled to pick it up, but my hand trembled above the receiver as the darkness pressed in closer, feeling more alive than the customers outside. Ignoring the call was not an option, so I forced myself to lift the receiver, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead, and I swallowed hard as I answered, my voice quavering, "Hello!" But only silence greeted me on the other end, thick and suffocating. And as I waited for a response, the shadows seemed to surge forward, engulfing the store in a thick fog of dread. "You shouldn't have answered," a voice whispered from the depths of the line, gravelly and distorted, as if it were coming from the very walls themselves, and a chill ran down my spine as I hung up, the receiver slipping from my fingers and crashing onto the counter, my breath quickening as the laughter returned, echoing through the aisles again, more sinister than before. My gaze darted to the window, where I noticed the woman in the red coat standing outside, her figure outlined against the dim glow of the parking lot lights. She had moved closer without me realizing it, and a primal instinct screamed at me to run, but I remained rooted in place, an unwilling witness to whatever dark game was unfolding. Suddenly, a loud thud reverberated through the store, emanating from the back room, and my heart raced as I remembered the rule about investigating noises. The thud came again, more insistent this time, and against my better judgment, I felt a strange compulsion to uncover the truth, as if some unseen force was pushing me towards it. I turned towards the back room, adrenaline surging through me, and with every step, the darkness seemed to swell around me, a living entity intent on swallowing me whole. I pushed the door open, my heart pounding in my chest, and as I stepped into the shadows, the air grew colder, and I could almost taste the fear coiling in my throat like a serpent ready to strike. And then I saw it. A figure hunched over in the far corner, shrouded in darkness, and as I fumbled with my flashlight, the beam caught its twisted form, revealing a sight that made my blood run cold. It was a man, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken deep into their sockets, and the moment he locked eyes with me, I felt a jolt of terror. He raised a finger to his lips, a silent warning, and just like that, the laughter erupted around me, a cacophony of voices mingling with the harshness of the store, and I understood, with a gut-wrenching clarity, that I was no longer alone, that the rules had been set in motion, and as I stumbled back towards the counter, the shadows closed in tighter, and the true horror of my predicament settled into the marrow of my bones, an ever-present reminder that this place was alive, a grotesque parody of a convenience store where my survival hinged on the relentless adherence to rules that felt less like guidelines and more like chains binding me to my fate. And I braced myself for whatever came next, the darkness pulsing with a malevolent energy that promised torment and despair, each tick of the clock echoing the countdown to my doom. The air grew heavier as the night deepened, each tick of the clock resonating like a countdown to an inevitable doom. I struggled to focus on the customers, my thoughts swirling around the rules etched into my memory, especially the one about the woman in the red coat. She loomed in my mind like a specter, her presence evoking a primal fear that thrummed through my veins. I caught sight of her again, lingering near the snack aisle, and an unease settled in my stomach. The light flickered above her, casting a sinister glow on her crimson garment. I recalled the second rule: if you hear a child laughing, do not investigate. And when I heard that laughter echoing through the aisles, it sent icy tendrils of dread spiraling down my spine, the sound ethereal and haunting, reverberating off the shelves and making my heart race as I gripped the edge of the counter. I chided myself for being paranoid. It was just a convenience store, after all. But the flickering lights and the unsettling silence that followed the laughter made my skin crawl, the whispers growing louder, as if they were mocking my fear. Never count the cash after dark, I reminded myself, feeling the weight of the cash drawer pressing down like a coffin lid. And despite the urge to check the register, I forced myself to look away, my eyes scanning the room as I tried to steady my breathing. But the shadows seemed to shift and move in the corners of my vision. And when the overhead lights flickered again, casting the store in an eerie twilight, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, watching, just beyond the edge of the light. I considered the ominous warning about the phone ringing after midnight, each chime echoing like a siren's call, urging me to pick up the receiver and delve into the unknown. But I knew better than to succumb to that temptation. A loud crash shattered the quiet, and I jumped, my heart racing, the sudden noise reverberating through the aisles like a thunderclap, and I instinctively glanced towards the source, my eyes wide with terror, fearing what I might find. I felt an inexplicable chill race down my spine, recalling the rule about silence being an omen. And as the store fell eerily still, a feeling of foreboding settled over me like a heavy blanket. Suddenly, the door swung open, the bell ringing like a warning, and my breath caught in my throat as I prepared myself for whatever horror might enter next, the oppressive atmosphere thickening as I recalled the rules that governed this nightmare. I gripped the edge of the counter tighter, the cold wood grounding me as I braced myself for a confrontation with the unknown, each second stretching into eternity, the boundaries between reality and nightmare blurring, knowing that each choice I made could seal my fate within this hellish purgatory. The store felt alive, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a reminder of the darkness that lurked just outside my vision, and I could feel the weight of the rules bearing down on me. A relentless reminder that in this place, survival depended on obedience, and as I steeled myself for what lay ahead, I knew the true test had only just begun. As I staggered back from the figure in the darkened back room, my heart thundering in my chest like a war drum, I felt an overwhelming wave of panic wash over me. I had to escape this hellish convenience store. The laughter morphed into an insidious chorus, mocking me, taunting me as I dashed towards the exit, the lights flickering more violently now, and each step felt like a battle against an unseen force pulling me back into the shadows. Bursting through the door, I gasped in the cold night air, but the moment I stepped outside, the weight of dread settled over me like a suffocating blanket, and I could feel the darkness pulsating behind me, closing in like a predator stalking its prey. I sprinted to my car, my mind racing, every instinct screaming at me to move faster as I fumbled for my keys, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I forced myself to stay focused. I yanked the door open and dove into the driver's seat, the familiar scent of worn leather doing little to comfort me as I jammed the keys into the ignition, desperation clawing at my throat. I twisted the key, praying for it to roar to life, but instead, the engine coughed and sputtered, the sound echoing like a cruel joke in the stillness of the night. Panic surged through me. I turned the key again, feeling the sweat bead on my forehead as I glanced into the rearview mirror, the shadows shifting ominously behind me. The store loomed like a dark sentinel, and I could almost hear the laughter rising again, beckoning me back with sinister intent. With a final, frantic twist, I heard the engine sputter once more, and the dread settled deeper into my bones as I slammed my fists against the steering wheel, the sound a hollow thud against the encroaching terror. I couldn't let it win. I had to get away. With my heart pounding like a drum, I took a deep breath and turned the key for a third time, and this time, the engine roared to life, a sound so sweet it was almost heavenly, cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. I slammed the gear into drive, the tires screeching against the asphalt as I tore away from the store, the headlights illuminating the shadows that clawed at my rear. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of the woman in the red coat standing at the entrance, her smile now a twisted snarl, and a rush of relief mixed with fear surged through me as I pressed down on the accelerator, the familiar road stretching out before me. Yet the laughter followed, echoing in my mind, a reminder that I had escaped, at least for now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the rules would always be watching, that the shadows would always linger just beyond the light, waiting for the moment I would let my guard down and slip back into their grasp. And as I drove away, the engine's roar drowned out the darkness behind me, but deep down, I knew the terror was far from over, and the nightmares of that cursed convenience store would haunt my every step, a relentless reminder of the rules I had narrowly escaped. But even as I put distance between myself and that place, the oppressive weight of what had just transpired clung to me like a second skin, whispering that there was no true escape from the darkness that thrived in the corners of the world. And though I had fled, I felt its icy fingers still reaching for me, vowing that one day I would have to face it again.